Aloha, my name's Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is transforming education through leadership and community engagement. And I'm pleased to introduce Brad Mahon, President and CEO of Great Plains College and author of Leadership is Personal. With over 25 years of experience in higher education, Brad is here to share insights on transforming learning experiences, fostering industry partnerships, and the evolving role of education in today's world. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Anna. It's great to be here.
Thanks. So to kick us off, can you share a little bit about your personal journey and how you started off in education and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and it's that's I think part of the exercise of the book. I think in some ways, the book is writing to myself, the younger me of 20 or 25 years ago, because I think that, and I don't pretend to know a lot, but I do think, we never sort of know the journey that life might take us on. And I say that as a somebody who as a teenager, wanted to play lead guitar in an LA hair metal band. And there really was no plan B, Anna, right? And then I think, as that dream sort of fizzled and I decided that, music was too important to me for it to be a hobby. People give you that advice, hey, get a job that, make music or, whatever your passion is, your hobby. It's not bad advice. But I think for me it was too much a part of me. So I went to college and university and got some paperwork and ended up teaching and playing professionally on the side and it was good. But I think, that when you start hanging around places, people start giving you other things to do. And all of a sudden, you find yourself, guiding programs, leading people. I think it can happen accidentally. And, that's one of those kind of things that I like to say is, kind of being an accidental leader where that was never the plan. And all of a sudden, I think for me, one of the contradictions was, for me to teach in a university classroom, I needed a PhD. But as I started leading people and, managing departments and, those are the kinds of things that maybe that PhD training at first, I didn't think it had trained me for. Right. And I think for many of us, you start to feel like you have this imposter syndrome, right?
Mhm.
I felt formally trained to be standing in front of a classroom, or maybe I felt formally trained to be on the concert stage, but the boardroom was terrifying, right? So I think that's part of it. And the more I've learned and the more I've talked to other leaders, I know that we're not alone and that other people feel that way. So as I said, I think that, in many ways this book is a reflection on that, looking back on the years, how did we get there? And I think for a lot of us, our journey includes kind of going back and filling in some of those gaps. I mean, we certainly can acknowledge and we recognize those transferable skills, things that we might have learned along the way that actually did prepare us, that experience, the intuition we develop in our sectors. But I think, for a lot of us going back and kind of understanding best practices and continuing to learn and grow is an important part of it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I actually almost went to art school and then decided that kind of similar that didn't want that stress in my life. Like I enjoyed art and I didn't want to do it for other people. I wanted to, enjoy it or do it for myself. Right. And then, of course, marketing was a good way to digitize that learning. But I appreciate that. So when did you decide that now is the time to write this book? Like what was that little how long you been working on it and when was your aha moment that this was the time?
Well, I think for me, I did have an aha moment. It was about just about 2 years ago, and I was at a conference in Montreal, and I was giving a paper. That's what we do in academia, right? We go to conferences and we give papers. And I was giving a paper topic, and it was, some of it is in the book. And after the conference, I started thinking to myself, and I started reflecting on some of the other conference papers I'd given. And I thought to myself, gosh, I wonder if there's enough material there to maybe form something larger. You go to a conference and you talk, for 20 or 30 minutes and maybe take some questions. Well, you start to compound that And so I started thinking about it on sort of on a bigger scale. And then, I think it kind of it started to steamroll from there a little bit.
Wow. So Great Plains College, you have served multiple communities. And what is your kind of niche there? Do you have a niche?
Yeah, we do. And and that's one of the things, I think in leadership that has been a really important discovery for me. I mean, here at Great Plains, our mandate, we're publicly funded, and our mandate is to serve our communities and to provide education and training that meets labor market demand in our communities. And so, really, those values of community, those values of providing a transformational educational experience. I mean, one of the things I'm really proud of is that we do transform lives through education and training. Students who come to our college, they're not the same person when they leave. The experience transforms them. And I like to say to them, we might have provided them the opportunity, and we certainly work to connect them to industry so that they're going to have that pathway to employment after, but they do the heavy lifting. And that is our mandate. We serve a 100,000 square kilometer region here in southwest and west central Saskatchewan. So it's a large region. I do a lot of driving, and we have 6 campuses, and they're very different. I mean, that's one of the other things that I've learned from getting out there and talking to people is we certainly can't paint our 6 campus communities with one brush. They're all slightly different and have their own nuances.
Wow. So is it like a traditional college or more of like a, shorter college, like a, vocational kind of school?
Yeah, I think the latter, like you said, most of our programs are 1 and 2 years.
Mhm.
We do have students that go on to full degrees, so they can finish their 1 year certificate, they can finish their 2 year diploma, and maybe their pathway isn't to the workforce. Maybe their pathway is on to more education. So they go off to one of the 4 year, baccalaureate programs. They go to a university that we have a partnership with, and they finish their degree. But for a lot of our students, that 1 year certificate, that tier diploma, it takes them out into the workforce. We offer a lot of programs in healthcare, programs in the trades, programs in early childhood education. That's a big need. Some business programming as well too, hospitality. So, like you say, sort of more shorter term, I guess, compared to, those longer 4 or 5 year programs. And then I know I was at a university before this, and our average completion rate was for a 4 year degree was between 5 or 6 years. So, not everybody finishes in that short period of time, and we even recognize our own students. They're working. Some of them are working part times or even more, and sometimes it's tricky to complete that certificate or diploma or degree in the period of time that is kind of expected. I think originally.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the role of education just in general, I mean, is it really sustainable to have a 4-year education in the world we live in today with the costs, there's so expensive and then students are coming out with all this debt, at least here in America they are. And and they're not, they're not gonna be able to pay that off in any meaningful way, and then there's another burden that they're being placed on right from the beginning. I think that causes a lot of stress and think that now with how fast things are changing, this might be a better model.
Yeah. No, I just want to know. I had to take a drink because you just asked. You just asked the big question. So I had to get ready for that. No, well said. And Anna, I mean, you mentioned it in the States. It's not that different here in Canada, where you know, um, I think that we're at a time right now in higher education, colleges, university, polytechnics, where the value of what we offer is being questioned. I mean, I think that and it's not just today, 2025. It's we've seen it for a few years now. Um, there are um, there are other options for students, right? There are our micro credentials, these kind of shorter programs that often have a more direct link to industry. We're even seeing industry, companies like Amazon offering their own training, Google, right? So we have that, I'll say competition. I think there's an opportunity for us to sort of lean into some of those situations and see if we can't, build those partnerships. Because I think fundamentally we all want the same thing. We want a functioning workforce, right? To serve our communities. And so, anyway, like I said, you've asked the question. And I sometimes think, well, how did we get here? And I think that, for us, I think we need to continue to ask questions. I know one of the questions that I always ask when I'm out and about is, what can we do for you? How can we serve our community? What do our communities need from us? I think we need to ask those questions. And most importantly, I think we need to listen to the answer.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I have a client, Hawaii Medical College here in Hawaii, and they do something very similar, training for nurse aides and pharmacy technicians and billing and coding and things like that. And they have very close networks with the hospitals because the need is so great, and that makes it very accessible. But I think you're right. And now with the evolution of AI and some of these changes in what we're really asking from a human. And I think that it's
Mm.
only going to become more important that there's a ability to quickly pivot and so that someone's education isn't necessarily wasted. Oh, I learned how to do this and now AI is doing it. Well, what does that mean for me?
Absolutely. And again, you hit on another big topic right now, AI. I think that, probably one of the biggest things that we're all dealing with in terms of, I think in some ways trying to keep up to it. I think we all acknowledge its presence, and it's obviously here to stay. But looking at it from a few different angles, what is AI mean in the classroom? How do we teach students to use it in a way that maintains integrity?
Yes.
Because let's face it, there's a lot of benefits to it. Um, but again, how do we skirt that fine line, of academic integrity with the benefits that AI has? I mean, this is going to sound like a very crude example, but I mean, I remember going through grade school and even junior high, and multiplication tables and learning all these, and then you do get to the point where all of a sudden it's like, well, we're going to use calculators, and it's I don't think that we're dumbing things down, but we're using our brains for different things, right? We're saying, well, what if this robot does those types of calculations? And by the way, full disclosure, I'm not saying people shouldn't know how to multiply and add, but all I'm saying is that I remember going through, and again, it was what it was, but you just were drilled and drilled on those things. And now I think we're sort of saying, what things do we move over to AI and have the robots do, and then how do we then fill that space in our brains, right?
Right. It's so funny you say that. So I have a daughter, she's 10 and a half, and I don't even know how to do the math they're doing now. I'm like, when did, math change? I think thank God I have a tutor and she's getting refreshed too, but I didn't realize that we weren't teaching the same math that we used to teach. So that was a revelation. I have a question for you about that I've seen that I wonder, of your opinion. So, you know, the role of a waitress or a server, that is something that is such a need, right? And there's definitely a clear distinction between those that know how to do a great job at and make more money from it, and it's a profession, and those that, and no restaurants really provide any training. Have you ever seen, like any kind of education around that? Why isn't that something that people are being educated on? Service.
Well, and then that's something, I mean, we're seeing a bit of a growth of that here. We have a hospitality program, and it is to your point, working to sort of differentiate people who have been professionally trained, kind of what I mentioned earlier. They've acquired some best practices. I think that there's some things that, I mean, you use the example of the server. I think we've all been out where, somebody comes to your table and they introduce themselves, and you just have this feeling like, this is going to be good. We're going to get well taken care of here. And then I think we've all been in the situation where somebody comes and introduces himself at the table, and you think, oh, well, this is going to be, maybe this is going to be interesting. There'll be a few red flags, but I think, that's part of, I think with education and training is opening people up to some best practices so they can be the best version of that. And I'm a big believer of that, Anna. Like, whatever you do, why not try to do it really well? So, whether you're an accountant or a server or a musician, whatever it is, why not do it as well as you can?
I mean, it's the big benefit. I mean, my first job was at a bakery. I grew up in Aspen, Colorado, and I was working at Paradise Bakery, and I wanted the job, so they let me work even with my mom's approval at 14, right when I was going to turn 15, over the summers, and then I was a server, and I made double the tips that everyone else did. And it was from a simple thing, and it was just keeping your head up, like looking around. Someone just needs a fork. A lot of people just bury their head and run between, that they don't want to see anyone. And so I think it's very simple things. But, let me pivot a little bit. Talk to me about transformative education and learning experience.
Mm.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'll use myself as an example. And I don't mean for this to be sample size one. I think, and I've seen it throughout, you know, my career is, education and training transformed my life. I don't know where I would be in life if it wasn't for the decision to, enroll in a program and be the best, like I was just mentioned, to be the best version of that I could be. And so, for me, I think, back to the role that I have here, and I mentioned to you earlier, seeing those students, they're not the same person. They enter on day one as the person that crosses that stage at graduation. And one of the things that we have here, we have about 5,000 unique individuals at our college. So, there's enough students where you don't know everybody, but there's also it's a student population that you do get to know some people, right? And so, getting to know some of the students, hearing their stories, and understanding what education and has done for them, how it has changed their lives. We know that for students, when let's say they're sitting around the table with their family and they make that decision to go back to school and we know that sometimes finances, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, it can be a barrier to the classroom. And so we work really hard with our community partners to have a robust scholarship program, try to move those barriers out of the way to create that pathway to the classroom. And some of those students, depending on the award they're applying for, they might write a short essay, talking a little bit about their circumstances. And you read some of these and you understand the adversity that some students overcome, that perseverance that they have, and it's truly inspiring. And to see then, them as they complete that education and training, and again, whether they go into the labor market or whether they use that as a pathway to go into further education and training, but to hear from them how that transformed their lives. And just last week we had one of our programs that we have at multiple locations, multiple campus locations, is a practical nursing diploma, licensed practical nurse. And it's a 2-year diploma program. And we had a student come in last week, former student and alum. And, she graduated here many decades ago and made a very significant donation to our scholarship program last week that's going to create a 10-year scholarship for the next generation of practical nurses. But again, part of her story that she was talking to us, and we're going to do a whole story on her in the spring, was that how that education and training changed her life. And so I think it's something, and I'm kind of just giving you some anecdotal stories, but we just see it over and over and over again. And then when you look at the bigger picture, what those students, I mean, we have data that shows that students that train local are more likely to stay local after, especially when we connect them to local businesses and give them practicum opportunities. And, sort of then to see how those students then, how that compounds and they transform the communities where they live. It's pretty inspiring.
Wow. So, and what's your break between online education and in person?
Yeah, great question. Because, online education is, it's a thing, right? And I remember,
Especially if you're working at the same time,
oh,
the
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And I was at a university before I was here at the college where, we had a significant number of online programs. And, it was kind of this palpable feeling I had as sort of the online programs are growing. And I thought maybe I'd try to get through the podcast without mentioning COVID, but that was a thing. And I remember even, online programming, when we were bumped up into COVID there, and we had this online programming that seemed to work well with a lot of folks there who were at home. But it was really palpable to me that the competition that we had when I was at that university weren't just from the other colleges and universities within that city. It was actually national. I mean, and so I remember when I was looking at our enrollment lists and seeing students. I mean, obviously we had a lot of students from the province because they knew our brand. But also looking, we literally had students from coast to coast, and we had some students from the United States as well too, because they had that online piece and it was accessible for them, right? Back to your question about what we're doing here at the college. I liked the word you said earlier was kind of vocational programming, that hands-on, right? And so whether it's our practical nursing program, which is very applied, or our trades programs, a lot of those programs are very, I mean, they often work best in a in-person environment. And so we don't have a lot of online programs. The other thing that I would say too is now in, let's look post-COVID, online programming. I mean, that was one of those things when I look back at the pandemic, I think this is going to sound strange. What were the good things about the pandemic? I know that sounds a little, but I think it was,
Whereas I hear you, there were good things about the pandemic.
and I think one of them was this, like I remember a really great example, faculty member who, we had a lot of online programs already, but we were going into so we said, we're going to do more online programming. And I had some faculty who said, I've been teaching for 20 years. I've never taught online. I don't like it. I don't. And we worked with them to get them comfortable, to get them in front of that screen. You fast forward 2 years later, and they said, you know what? I think I want to keep doing that. I mean, they welcomed going back to the classroom and they welcomed that interaction, but they said, you know what? I'll keep teaching one online course every semester because you know what? That was okay. And for some of them, it was the vulnerability of coming forward and saying, gosh, like here I've been teaching for 20 years and teaching that online course. It was like my first day again. It was their first day in the classroom again.
They learned
And yeah, absolutely. And so anyway, I think that the one point I was going to make the two is I think that there are schools out there that have really embraced and invested in online learning, and they do it really well. There are some schools out there that really they almost, you can say, they specialize in online learning. I think they do it really, really well. And I think that, just back to our own situation, I think if we have students that say to us, you know what, we're really looking for an online experience, I think we direct them to that because I think one of the things that we want to do is we want to do what's best for the student. And I think sometimes if you have to say to a student, the best thing for you is to go somewhere else, I think we've done the right thing for them. Some of the students that we've got, again, they're going to thrive in that applied online, in-person environment here in our classrooms.
Yeah. So in your book, Leadership is Personal, what are some of the frameworks that you're utilizing to help people, really understand the concepts?
Well, I think there's sort of three bigger buckets, large buckets for me. And I think that, some of it, again, as I mentioned to you right off the bat, looking back on some runway behind me and looking for, again, while situations are somewhat unique, there's also some commonalities. And, one of the things that I've, really reflected on, I mean, one thing we hear about sometimes is you hear, oh, it's just business. Business is business, right? And I think we understand, but I think for me, leadership is different. I think for me, it's about seeing the humanity in people. And I think, you know, um, working, I think back to my three buckets, one of them is really how do you foster a thriving internal culture, a culture where employees feel valued. They really feel valued. They feel that the organization cares about them and they're proud of their organization, right? They're proud. And I think that, I mean, it comes from a lot of things. I know sometimes we see in our modern workplace, we might see kind of stand-up desks and all kinds of cool things in the staff room. And those are important too, because they can often make employees happy. But again, I think it's the bigger part of your employees seeing how invested you are in their communities. And so when you're out there in the community supporting events and connecting with businesses, that your employees are proud to say, yeah, that's my company. I work there. And I think relatedly, the other bucket of the second bucket is how do you build that ferocious support within your community where, you look out the window and you see someone walking down the street and maybe they never came to your, in our case, the college or the university, but they value having you in their community. They see the impact that they have. They see the contribution you're making. And so really those two things, I like to call it, building community inside and then of course building that community network outside. But I think the third bucket is that to get there, it really comes back to self-development, right? I think it's spending time understanding who you are as a person, developing those those skills that, self-reflection, a big part of leadership. And so I sort of take folks through that. I'm, in terms of how I mentioned to you earlier, someone who didn't have formal leadership training, and how I've kind of gone back and had to fill in some of those gaps, and what I've learned from there.
It's really interesting. I was watching this podcast this morning from Lewis Howes, who I love, and it was about frequency and words and communication, and how everything you say has a frequency, right? The words do, and how leadership often they kind of miss the mark in terms of what is appropriate communication for their employee, versus coming back home, right? And is there a line, right? So for instance, if you're in the military and you're, barking orders at someone, right? Well, is that the same type of frequency and way you want to share that the experiences of leadership that you have with your family? And I think a lot of people sometimes, cross over, they blur the lines. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, you bring up a good point about, looking at some different environments, such as the military, which, um, you like you say, the barking out of orders. I mean, because that is a leadership style we have, right? I mean, there are some, um, you know, bosses who we may have, managers, supervisors, whoever, who may have that more militant style. They value hierarchy, orders are not to be questioned, those kinds of things, right? And I guess it maybe depend. I guess it's a question to ask leaders of what kind of culture do you want to build and cultivate. I mean, certainly back to the military. I mean, there's also a safety.
Bombs are flying, then
The arms are flying, right? It's not the time to say yeah to. So I mean that is
so what's my motivation, right?
yes, exactly. Yes. So I think that there's certainly some examples that are worth unpacking there. I think for a lot of us who are maybe not in those extreme roles, but in some ways where we do have circumstances that are high stakes. I mean, for a lot of us, business success is I don't think it's dramatic. It can be life and death from a different perspective, right? Life and death of a company, as well too. I mean, the bottom line matters, and that's why I was saying, even though the title of the book is "Leadership is Personal," I certainly didn't want people to think it was kind of a hold hands and kumbaya kind of thing, because I do certainly recognize it, and I'm in that situation myself where there is a bottom line. I mean, I've had a lot of experience, running arts organizations and in post secondary. But as I like to say, I mean, it's still a multi-million dollar business. And sometimes there is that number. I've been at places where there's that number, that target that you need to hit every year, and if you don't make it, it's quite uncomfortable, right? To say the least.
And I think that I like the title because it makes me think of a lot of different things, the kind of like back to what I was saying, like that, if you're a good leader, you should be able to kind of separate some if you're having a bad time at home, or, your wife's divorcing you, or whatever's happening, that you don't bring that into the business, right? And treat others that way. But at the same time, it can go another way. And, here you are, we all know, being business leaders, that there's a lot of people that rely on us every day, right? And it can be very challenging and heartbreaking when you have to let someone go, or you have to, you have to tell them that there's a pay cut, or it's not a good fit. And, and being able to realize that there is that bottom line, and while it's personal for them and it's going to be personal for you, it still has to be business.
Yeah, and it's I think one of the things in real estate, it's location, 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 right? And I feel like in leadership, it's communicate, communicate, communicate. And I think, just, you've got some good examples there where, like you say, if you're having a day where there's something happening that has nothing to do with work, but it's affecting you, and, saying to your colleagues, hey, by the way, got some stuff going on. It's not related to work, but it's got me distracted. And so, I've said to people, if you notice I'm a little off today, it's not you. There's not, my mind's somewhere else, and I just want to make sure that it's not you. And I know, especially when you're in that leadership role, the people who are reporting you on you, they appreciate that, because if you don't communicate, they'll fill in the gaps. They'll tell themselves a story like, oh gosh, Brad's a little off today. What did I do? Is there something, you know what I mean? And so communicating with them that yeah, that it's that, or again, back to to making sure that you check in regularly, I think, with folks. I mean, one of the things that I like to do is I send out a weekly email to all staff. It's an internal thing. It's a little casual, usually a few photos from the road showing the things that I've been up to over the week. Because again, sometimes people don't see you all the time. And I think it's important for people to stay connected. And again, you want them to be or feel proud of the work that's getting done across the region because, I think for a lot of us at work, it's not unusual that we're often aware of what's happening right in front of us or right on our desk, maybe in the office around us. And I think it's reminding folks that they're part of something, bigger, and that can be really exciting too, right? That their contributions, while they matter in the immediacy of the area that they're working in, they're also having a bigger impact too. And hopefully they celebrate that. And I think that's also part of how we bring it to folks is what tone do we use or what perspective do we give them? Like, here's the work that here's the work that you're part of. Let's celebrate that and thank you.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly the frequency that's going to empower people.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit. So you say you're a musician. How does your background in music influence your perspectives in the book?
Well, I think for me, um, especially, as in some of my early leadership roles where I was struggling mentally a little bit, with that imposter syndrome. And, for me, I was able to kind of connect and draw a parallel back to, some of the early days where I was playing and learning, and I was younger, and I struggled a little bit with stage fright, and it was frustrating because I actually loved playing the guitar and I loved being on stage. But what I found is when I got on stage, my mind was my mind was racing. There was some feelings of self doubt, and it interfered. And as a result, I would often walk off stage and feel like that wasn't the best I could do, and it was disappointing. It was disappointing to me, and discouraging. And so of course, I thought that the answer was spend more time practicing. That had to be the answer. I wasn't working hard enough. I wasn't practicing hard enough. And I actually had a professor who said to me, "Well, actually, what if we actually spent less time with your hands on the guitar and more hands with?" And she handed me a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. And it was really about sports psychology. And it was really about, I mean, again, with the inner game of tennis, how come, the author talks, how could, those drop shots or those great shots you could make during the tennis practice, sometimes under the gaze of the crowd or in a real game, you would struggle. And so for me, I saw those parallels between what was happening to me in the practice room or the rehearsal versus what was happening on the stage. And so it really worked a lot on my inner game and my psychology, and so that helped me a lot at that time. And then I found, as an emerging leader or a new leader, I found this was sometimes my biggest challenge. My colleagues were actually incredibly supportive. That wasn't it. I mean, people were wonderful, but it was me getting in my own way. And so I went back to that inner game of tennis, and again had to go back and kind of work on that inner psychology. And I think for me, Anna, it really opened up the world of leadership studies for me. And so throughout this book, I mean, the book's not is not. I mean, hopefully, people don't find it heavy with theory. It's not meant to be that way, but a few nuggets put in here or there, to maybe support some of my ideas or show people kind of where the genesis of some of these thoughts came from.
Nice. So, what is one actionable thing that someone can do right now who's listening on their path to being a better leader?
Um, I would say reflect. Um, it is, I mean, it's worked for me. And if you dig into some leadership literature, you're going to find it a recurring theme. Successful leaders, good leaders, whatever you want to call it, they reflect, and it's intentional. So for me, I come into work each morning. I'm usually one of the first people here. Custodians are here. I've always done it. Maybe security guards, those kinds of things. But usually, I'm one of the. And again, it's not. It's because the place is quiet, and I can sit. Sometimes literally in the dark and sip a cup of coffee and just think a little bit. Think about the interactions I had the day before, and what can I learn from those things? And was there anything that I might have done differently, and or why did I respond the way I did? And then I might as well look at the day ahead of me. Is there anything in the day ahead, any prickly conversations, anything I should be prepared for? So it's really thinking those kinds of things through. And I would really encourage folks to do that. I have I have a journal. I jot down
Just
some.
wanted to ask if you were a journaler.
I am a journaler, and I don't, I wouldn't say I go on and on and write things, but I've read a few things back, to myself. I call them light bulb moments. If I have a few light bulb moments, I'll write those down. And so I would really encourage people to do that. I mean, you'll learn a lot about yourself. Be honest with yourself. It helps your self-awareness as well too, because I think the more you do it, you start to be able to, yes, you're in the moment interacting with somebody, but then there's also, there's a party that can kind of separate from a second party that can almost kind of separate and view what's happening a little bit. And that's important too.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you ever read The Miracle Morning, the book, but
No, I haven't.
oh, it's
I'm gonna write it. I'm
it's
gonna write it down in my journal.
absolutely, it's wonderful, and I've always been, well, not always, but in the last couple of years, I've been a morning person. I'll get up at 4 and similar. I like to be watch the sunrise and drink coffee, but I'll exercise. I have a home gym and do affirmations and read and things like that. And then I read The Miracle Morning, and he recommended also journaling and meditation. So I've started doing, I'm dyslexic. That's so that my early education was a lot different than others as well, because people I couldn't read out loud really and things like that. So it's interesting how the different tools we had available then, now and then. But so I speak to my app. I can type really fast, but if I have to write it down, then there's spelling errors, and it's torturous for me who types really fast. But I can speak to the app. And then he recommended in the book that every year you go back on New Year's and reread your journal entries. And
Okay.
it was transformative, I gotta tell you. Like, I didn't even read the whole year, but just reading what I had written when I started journaling, I was a totally different person. Not a totally different person, but I had evolved so much since then. And so I think that, it is a really good exercise, and doesn't have to be long or anything. I think people think, "Oh, it's too much work," but if you just, speak to the app or whatnot, and then recently I've started meditating and found that to be so much more valuable than I ever realized.
Yeah. Well, and I think, one of the things is I think that leadership journey, it's within, it has to be within us, right? There's a part of it where, we need to continue to look inside and, like you say, you know, and I'm a morning person too. I mean, for some people, maybe it's an end of the day thing, whatever. I think, I just would encourage people find that time. And for many of us, we're really busy, right? I mean, you and I back and forth, even connecting to find time today, right? Like people are busy, but I find for myself, find that time, even if you have to schedule it and say, this is time where I'm going to sit and I'm going to be on my own and I'm going to think about those things and learn about myself, understand my values, find what is my leadership voice? What is my vision? Those types of things.
Absolutely. Well, I guess my last question for you is looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of education, and what's next for you? Do you have a plan for another book or public speaking? Do you have any kind of, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Those are good questions. I think I'll start with your first one. Where do I see education going? Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I think that we're at a time right now where we are being challenged a little bit. Like you said, people are questioning the cost because we know that students are coming out with debt. And I mean, even though that's not unusual, we need to be able to say to them, okay, if there is a cost to it, but look at the value that it's providing. But I think we're being challenged on that, and I think that we need to, as I say, sort of meet in the middle and you know do a better job of reminding people of what our value proposition is. And I think maybe that does involve working with industry, to so that we're seen as not it's either you go to school or you go into the workforce. That how can we work together, right? Again, for cultivating a workforce that's best for our communities. I think for me, well, I mean, here we are talking today this is the birthday. The book got released today. So I think that, I'm curious to see what folks think. I will say it's well, exactly, when you're inside of it. I think you do lose objectivity at some point, right? And so I'm curious to see what the reaction is from the public and if people find it helpful. And yeah, I mean, certainly, looking at some of the content and saying and looking at ways to rework it for some workshops and some speaking and those types of things too. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens over the coming months and years.
Well, and for everyone who's listening, since this won't air today, it is February 18th, 2025. So congratulations on the launch of your book.
Thank you.
The big deal. I remember when I first got my copies before my launch, and I just like hugged one and I just like rested it on my chest, and I was like, oh, it's like birthing a child.
Yeah, I felt well, I was gonna say I feel the same way, but I don't know that I have kids, but you know, no, I know it's surreal. I will say that. And so, as I said, I really do. I mean, I offer it to the world with humility, and I hope that it helps some folks out, and maybe people can gain some insight from my lessons learned.
Wonderful. Are you gonna have a party? Are you doing any kind of launch party or anything to celebrate?
Um, you know, I had not planned to. I have a nice bottle of Cab Franc that's would probably be appropriate. But no, I think just probably just something quiet. I mean, I'm really fortunate. I've got friends and family that even today with it being launched, I've been overwhelmed with text messages and messages because I put it out on some social media channels. And so yeah, I think I might just spend some time tonight just reading through those messages with a smile on my face and just some real gratitude.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for being here today. And for all my listeners, to learn more about Brad, you can visit him on bradmahon.com. He's on LinkedIn, and make sure to pick up a copy of Leadership is Personal on Amazon. And please join
Thanks.
me next week as I interview another industry expert and a topic to help you succeed on and offline. I'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.